Hey everybody, welcome back. So it was kind of fun doing the last album review for Yes's Big Generator. I thought I would move on to another album which I believe came out the exact same year. It's Rush's 1987 album, Hold Your Fire. And boy does it hold a lot of fire. Hold Your Fire is an album that's really kind of controversial with a lot of people. So for anyone that doesn't know, Rush was kind of this band from the 70s that combined a lot of sort of heavier music with more progressive type music. And a lot of people really think of the 70s, particularly the late 70s, early 80s, as being kind of their golden era. So what happened after that is they kind of started listening to a lot of cool new wave bands like The Police and New Order and different people like that. And you know, they thought they might try a little of that flavor in there and kind of combine it with what they were doing, what the core Rush thing is, and see what happens. And to this day, that kind of new wavy Rush, you know, mid to late 80s era is really kind of polarizing and controversial with some sectors of Rush fans. That's almost what it really comes down to. If you really like synthesizers and 80s-ness in general, like, you're probably gonna like these albums, but if you're kind of an old school rock and roll straightforward guy, or even just kind of an old school progressive rock guy, I don't know, you may have mixed feelings about these albums. But for me, I'm kind of in the middle of all that, so I think I'm in an interesting position to kind of give a couple thoughts about this album. We're gonna go through it track by track. We're gonna lock it down. We're gonna like make it entertaining, and hopefully you like it. I don't know, maybe. And track number 1. It's called Force 10. There's a lot of Rush fans that don't really like this era, but they'll like this song Force 10. It's got a lot of cool little elements, a lot of classic Rush stuff in there. Once you kind of get into the meat of Force 10, it starts going with these bass chord things and this underlying note that Geddy's doing. Kind of one of the criticisms that people would say of a lot of 80s Rush albums, but this one in particular, is that there aren't that many, there's not a really great wealth of dynamics. Like, it's all pretty kind of constant, but this is a good example of a song that really does have a little bit of up and down intensity. Like the verses are really intense, really pretty straightforward, and kind of have that 80s driving rock thing. A lot of cool little colors and images in them. But then you get to the chorus and it drops out and it's just like a little hi-hat from Neil and just some basic synth things going on in the background. Geddy's kind of like doing his vocal thing, and so it's a nice little, it's kind of almost a calm little moment. You got a couple of those. Something that becomes fairly apparent right away is that there's this real almost battle that was going on with guitar and keyboard parts. Like, Geddy was really, he wasn't just playing bass, he was playing keyboard. And they're kind of in the same sonic space that guitar is. So there's this kind of like push and pull thing going on. Like, Alex is wanting to play his guitar stuff and there's keyboard stuff there. And really, maybe another criticism of Hold Your Fire is that there's kind of a lot of parts that don't have any guitar in them at all, which I'm a pretty big Alex Lifeson fan. I like hearing this stuff, and he's got an iconic style and stuff. And so, you know, it's a bit of a shame. There's this pretty cool part towards the end of the song that has this back and forth keyboard thing, almost kind of exemplifying the whole struggle of keyboard versus guitar. But they make it into a cool little, like, it's a little lead-in to the last chorus or the last verse or something, I can't remember. Anyway, Force 10, it's a track that most people at least kind of like, and Rush actually played it on the last few tours they did. So, you know, some pretty good live versions out there of it. And track number 2, Time Stands Still. Time Stands Still has a really cool guitar riff. Some good bits. It's a little bit more guitar-centric than maybe some of the other songs on here, so maybe that's why it's kind of it's a little bit of an enduring classic. Something critical I would say of Time Stands Still is it's kind of exemplative of how Rush in the 80s in particular and onwards kind of got into this thing where they'd have quite a few songs on each album that have a pretty boring, like, chord progression that's just kind of basic. Now, if you listen to the verses of Time Stands Still and listen for the guitar part or whatever, there's actually, even though the chords are a little basic, he adds a little flavor here and there and does some different things. And there's even some rhythmic stuff that makes it kind of interesting. But, I mean, on the chorus, and I don't know, it's just like you kind of expect a little more from Rush. They're like mega musicians and stuff, and maybe that's unfair, I don't know, but for me, the chord structure is a little on the boring side. So Time Stands Still, I'd say a little bland, but there's a couple things. There are things that are good. Track number 3. Open Secrets. So the first two songs on Hold Your Fire arguably they're like pretty, among Rush fans at least, they're pretty well-known songs. They get played live and they're on compilations and stuff. Open Secrets, the third track, it's kind of like we're just now getting into the deep cuts. The stuff that you don't hear very much. So the song starts off with this intro that has a bunch of like layers of synthesizer stuff. And I mean, it's kind of like one of those things that if you're really kind of into their synthesizer-y stuff, I like it. I think it's pretty cool, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. If you're really into hearing Alex contribute a lot, like, it's just one of those places where I don't know what he's doing on stage at this point. You know, he's just waiting to play something. Something that's kind of an interesting aside with this song that it's a good opportunity to talk about is early on in Rush's career, I mean throughout their career they've been really noteworthy for their lyrics. Neil Peart, their drummer, writes all the lyrics with the exception of like 5 or 6 songs, but that's some Rush trivia stuff. Anyway, so like in the beginning, they were writing a lot of stuff about like mythic tales and Greek mythology and sci-fi and pretty abstract out there stuff. Like you can tell that on the road he was thumbing through all those Philip K. Dick novels and crazy stuff like that. But with Open Secrets, this is like a song about some very down-to-earth stuff, some very like real stuff, and it's more exemplary of what Rush would be in the future. And honestly, I kind of like this lyrical era. So my reading of Open Secrets lyrically is it's kind of about like these little conflicts that people will have with each other in relationships and stuff, and kind of how to like keep those relationships working. I don't know, I mean it's like a really down-to-earth practical subject matter. Like it's very different. These things that we're concealing will never let us grow. It's an interesting thing to hear Rush talking about relationship stuff. I think their background in writing about these really abstract mythical things gave them almost like this subject matter vocabulary to approach very human concerns, very real prescient concerns with sophistication. You know, approaching them with sophistication, which, I don't know, that's like right up my alley kind of stuff. I love like philosophy and I love psychology and self-knowledge, and to have songs that are kind of about this stuff, it's a thing I appreciate. Track number 4, Second Nature. So for me, Second Nature, it's one of those tracks that the people that don't like Rush's 80s albums, I almost don't know how you listen to it and really listen to the lyrics and stuff and not at least have some appreciation for it. So Second Nature starts the song off with these piano chords that are just like hit and it rings out, and it keeps going, and then just some simple vocals, and then it kind of progresses a little bit, gets a little more intense, and kind of goes back and forth. It's just a kind of almost a somber feeling, but in a quietly hopeful sort of way. And so that musically is the backdrop for a song that lyrically, I guess to say it succinctly, it's about how we should make the world and society better. I think the thing that dovetails nicely with the simple chord thing that was going on in the beginning and throughout is it's like Neil is saying, really, is it so complicated? Like, are the problems of our world really so unintuitive and difficult that we should just give up and just throw up our hands and act like there's nothing we can do? So the chorus starts with this line, "It ought to be second nature." And it's almost like he is saying, maybe we're overthinking some of this stuff. Maybe the basic empathetic human, like, impulses we have aren't so inept, aren't so inadequate to solve society's problems. Maybe it really almost is that simple. So conceptually, it's all talking about like kind of this push and pull between being idealistic and being practical. But it's almost like the conclusion is that being idealistic and having this basic empathy for each other, maybe that is the ball game. Maybe that's the cure. And obviously there's a lot of nuance in what that actually means. I don't know. People that just have this cold-eyed, pragmatic approach, maybe that's just not it. Personally, I don't know if I would totally agree with that idea, but that's kind of what's being said here in this song. And I think it's a pretty beautiful thing. And track number 5. Prime Mover. So for me personally, I would probably say Prime Mover is my favorite song off of this album. The 80s was this really positive, like upbeat era, especially for music. Not to say that there isn't like a lot of really great music that wasn't like that came from the 80s, but I don't know, I think that was the zeitgeist at the time. And I think you could kind of say the same thing for Rush. Like, Prime Mover is probably the most like upbeat, positive kind of sounding track on this album, and it's kind of like the cool vibe that Rush had at the time. And if you don't, like, people that get that and get why that's good probably appreciate it, and people that don't get it, you know, this would be an example of a song you probably don't like if you're not into that. So structurally on the verses, the first verse starts out kind of quiet and it builds into this thing. And something that's cool on the second verse is they take it and make it like even quieter than the first one and even more subdued. It just kind of starts off with this real easy bass thing, then goes into some stuff. And I think that's a really cool compositional thing. One of the like stupid book rules of writing songs is that you kind of keep building and like you don't really stop that. Sometimes it's interesting to take like a verse and just kind of take it down a notch a little bit. I don't know. It's something they would actually do a lot more later on in their career with different songs, and this may be the first time they did it, so kind of a nice move. So the song kind of goes trucking along, got this really cool driving positive vibe, and then you come to the bridge, which honestly I think the bridge in Prime Mover is like the best thing from this whole album. Critics are gonna say, well, that's not saying much, but hey, I think it's pretty good. So the bridge starts out kind of almost shockingly in this minor key, and it's almost kind of like subtly dramatic and like has a bit of a serious tone. I set the wheels in motion. And then it kind of like taking it low again, and then it slams in with a bunch of energy and kind of like has the same serious urgency or something, but it's like intense, and it's almost like it ties the whole thing of the song together. Then it goes back into a verse or a chorus or something. It's like a really subtle chorus actually. It's like the chorus but with subtlety. Doesn't get enough love. Track number 6. Lock and Key. So Lock and Key is a pretty different sort of a song to hear from a rock band. It's about like the dilemmas of the penal system. It's all about like how distasteful it is to have this severe system of punishment in society and how wrong it sort of feels in a way. But then reflecting on the idea that like, isn't it kind of necessary? There's a lot of stuff on this album that's really about some big picture stuff. I would say one of the big themes of the lyrics is like, it's kind of hard for good people to get that there are just some bad apples out there. And like, if you're like a decent person, you're gonna see the world and view other people as like also pretty decent. And you just gotta realize like sometimes that's just not true. And that's why we have this thing that doesn't totally feel right, but it's just like abstractly we kind of need to get that. I'm telling you, man, like you're not gonna hear this on the AC/DC albums. Musically, I would say this track is like right smack dab in the middle of stylistically what Rush was doing at the time. Got this cool like upbeat thing, and Neil's kind of doing some offbeat hits and stuff in his beats, which are cool. I mean, that was a big thing for him at the time. It's almost like right on the borderline of danceable. You also have this competing keyboard guitar thing like everything else. And also just like some really, really mature lyrics. Like Lock and Key is a pretty decent little song. If all the 80s-ness is really gonna turn you off, you probably won't like it. But if you're willing to kind of like think about the lyrics and get what's being communicated here, especially if you have some appreciation for the styles of the era, it was like probably a pretty innovative little song. Like it was pretty cutting edge stylistically for 1987, based on whatever else was popular, you know? This was not like some dated sounding thing. This was what was popular and they were doing it. I guess one thing that I like about how they were sort of adopting some of the popular styles and things of the era, Rush wasn't doing what they were doing in the 80s just to be trendy. They were genuinely interested in these new styles and new types of music and new bands and stuff, and like it came out in their music. They were rich dudes at the time, didn't really have to like try to catch the next wave just to stay relevant. They had tons of fans. They could do whatever they want, and I don't know, they liked a lot of these new bands and stuff and wanted to kind of like weave together what they do with what was going on, and I don't know, I'm pretty okay with it. Song number 7, Mission. So in this era when Rush was trying to weave together like what they sort of were with popular things, I would say that this is kind of a misstep. There are probably some people out there that really, really do like this song, Mission, and I can sort of understand why. It's kind of like not that great a mix of the things that they were trying to combine, in my opinion. Maybe the biggest qualm I would have with Mission would be the chorus. It's just almost too feely, or it just doesn't come across as like, I don't know. It feels almost forced and weird. Maybe from a writing perspective, it was like there was some kind of better idea in there, or maybe they could have done their chorus idea and done something to it, structured it differently, or changed the chords or the sounds or something. Maybe there was something they could do to make it like a little better than it was, and they just didn't marinate on that enough. Maybe what I would say is kind of a big shame about this song. So it's about some pretty cool subjects and stuff. It's like about having dreams and like how there are people that wish they had pursued their dreams and they can only look at the people that are and just have regret. It's like some heavy stuff. But then it also reflects on the concept of like there are these people that pursue their dreams and kind of like there's so much stuff they missed out on, just normal people stuff, that they look back on it and almost wish they had lived like a more average life or had gone through the arc of the kind of life that most people live. So Mission lyrically kind of touches on all that stuff. And like I said, it's really kind of a shame that musically it's just, I don't know, like there's just some real missteps here. Now Mission has this bridge part that's pretty cool. It's got a whole bunch of little parts and stuff. There's a really groovy guitar part that kind of starts it off. And then they do variations on. So even though I would say there's some pretty cool bits in there, like mostly a misstep, Mission. And song number 8, Turn the Page. So as we'll see later, the last 2 tracks on Hold Your Fire, I'd have to say they're kind of throwaways. So I kind of like to think of Turn the Page as the last song on this album. And I think it would feel pretty okay if it was. Turn the Page is a little bit like Force 10 in that it starts out with this pretty cool bass line, which is pretty nice. It's a little bit like there's high bass stuff going on and you have that underlying note, very similar to Force 10. In fact, that's another reason why it would be like a pretty good last track on the album, be like the bookends. Turn the Page has a lot of pretty cool, interesting key changes and modulations and stuff. It gives it an interesting feel. It's a little different for Rush. They're not as big on that as some other bands are. One of my other favorite bands is Genesis, particularly the early to middle era stuff. Even some of the 80s stuff is pretty okay, although I think they lost a little magic. But one of Genesis's things with their keyboardist Tony Banks is that he's all about key changes. He'll just go in and out of different keys and stuff in a really smooth and effortless way. I would say the key changes you hear in the song are a little less smooth and a little more obvious than that, but it's almost like they were taking a page out of the Genesis playbook, if you ask me. So pretty classic 80s Rush throughout, not anything terribly different than what you might expect. And then at a certain point towards the end, goes back to the bass thing from the beginning. Then there's like some drumming, little nuance stuff. Then it just like explodes into this guitar solo that Alex does, and it's almost like all that repressed keyboard resentment just gets like released all at once with this solo. And it's, you know, people kind of talk about it. It's a good little moment. And the thing that's cool about it is it gets all intense, and then it cuts out for the last chorus, and the way it goes out gets real like basic again. You know, I would say this album doesn't have quite as much dynamicness as maybe some other Rush albums would, so it's kind of nice that there are some dynamics here and there on the album. Has a really cool sound at the end. I kind of like that sound. So I almost feel bad for saying this, but the last two songs, we're not even going to talk about them. I mean, they're just kind of bad.
And
so there you go, Rush's album Hold Your Fire. A really divisive album among Rush fans and non-Rush fans alike. I think it's easy to look back on Rush albums and think like, wow, there's some real classics in here and here are some non-classics, but you kind of forget like they weren't writing this stuff to just be something people listen to decades in the future. Like maybe if they had taken that perspective, they wouldn't have written the kind of album they did. But I mean, this was meant to reflect on the currency, like what they were actually doing in their life at the time. And so I think there's a pretty good case to be made that that's the perspective that we should look at this album with. I almost hate to do the whole really cliche giving the album a grade thing, but just to go with that, for me, Rush's album Hold Your Fire gets a 6.95 to repeating. A lot of good details, some very interesting and really good parts and stuff, but a lot of like, I don't know, a lot of averageness. There's almost this myth out there that in order to make music accessible, you have to just go with really boring chords in a song. I don't know, I sort of regret saying it, but it's like Rush kind of fell into that. And personally, I just never bought that. Like, I think there's always ways to add nuance and detail to almost everything without making it overbearing and in your face, but still just give something, you know, throw a bone to the people that are just really, really paying attention. Why not? And Rush fans are the kind that are really, really paying attention. So I guess that's why I would give it the grade I gave it. That's pretty much all I've got to say about this album. Hope you enjoyed it. Probably gonna do more reviews and stuff. I picked kind of a sort of divisive, controversial Rush album to start my Rush series out with, and I just kind of want to know what you guys think. If you haven't listened to the album, go listen to it. Just tell me in the comments about some of the things, or just comment anything you think about this video. So have a great couple of days, guys. Thanks for stopping by and watching, and I appreciate it. Have a good time. See you guys later.